Hi. When I've been asked to help an organisation to improve their testing and I meet the testers, I usually ask them some pretty simple questions early on. It might be, who are your testing stakeholders? Or if they don't understand that question, who are you testing for? Now, I usually get a bit of a blank look or sometimes an evasive or a vague answer, or the answer is maybe their boss, the project manager or someone. If testing is a service, it has customers. Now, I call these customers stakeholders, so we have to understand who they are and what they want from us. I want to start by looking at what testing produces. It does have a product for our customers, our testing stakeholders. So let's look at testing in the round and ask the question, does testing change anything to start with? Well, we have our system and we do some testing and we produce the system unchanged. We don't change the system at all. We don't have a product. But of course there is a product. The product is information. This is the valuable stuff. This is why we test. We don't change the system in any way. What we do is produce information about that system. So, if you like, that information is what has value. And I want to look at that information in three ways, if you like. So if you imagine that testing is a service, it's an information provision service. Now that information, we produce it on behalf of our testing stakeholders. And the testing stakeholders, when they get that information from the activity we call testing, they make business decisions. Now these might be very big decisions indeed, to accept and implement and operate a new system. Or it might be a developer who simply has to explore the information and the system under test to seek out the cause of a failure that we seem to have caused in our testing. Now, what or who is a testing stakeholder? Well, stakeholder usually refers to our business sponsors, the highest level business decision makers, if you like, in our project or program, whatever it is. Now, our testers' stakeholders are the people who rely on us, the testers, for information to make decisions. Now, who might these people be? Now, they could be the business sponsors at the top of the tree, because they've got to make the biggest decision of all to accept a system and maybe to pay for it as well. But of course, developers and designers have a stake in what we do too. They want to know whether their architecture works, their software works, of course. Now, in the management realm, of course, project managers, if we have one, need to manage progress towards some goal. And testing helps us understand what the state of the software, the system in its entirety actually is. So they can recommend a decision to accept, to deploy, to change the project state, if you like, from development into system testing, or from development of low-level components into integration or a higher level of testing as well. The custodians of the system, maybe the operations people, but also other people who look after our technical architectures, are the custodians, and they have a stake in the outcome of testing as well. And of course, users or people who represent the user community also need to understand whether the system works for them. So of course, whenever we have to stage a test in some description, whether it's to test a new feature in an agile team, in a small development, or a major delivery of a complete system in a very large project indeed, we need to understand who our stakeholders are and what they want from us. We have to consult them. Now, the stakeholders ultimately have to make some decisions based on the information we provide, and depending on the stakeholder, there's a different decision to make. So the sponsors tend to focus on the big picture, the big decisions to go live or to accept, to pay for a system, maybe to occasionally rethink or delay or abandon a project. These are the big decisions, and our overall sponsors, our biggest stakeholders of all, have to make big decisions based on reliable information from testing. Now, of course, developers and designers rely on testers to identify failures in the system under test. So they can look at anomalies, maybe to correct faults in code, to maybe do redesign, and so on. Project managers need information from testing to understand the level of achievement. So to deliver a software system into a system test environment is one thing, but to know it works is a very different thing. So project managers need to understand when system testing is complete and all the failures that have been identified have been investigated and mostly corrected, if you like. But they need to know whether the system is in a state ready to migrate from one phase of a project to another, or to go live ultimately. The custodians of our systems, ultimate production systems, have to accept that system into a production environment so they can manage it and monitor it and to control it if necessary. And then the people in the user community need to accept the system into their business or operational environment. Now, all these people, probably not the sponsors, but most of these people also participate in testing, either to define tests or certainly to define the goals of testing, but might also be customers and simply hand off the testing to other professionals like ourselves. At any rate, these are the stakeholders and the decisions they have to make. Now, the relationship we have with stakeholders is the stakeholders provide direction. They help us to identify what's important to test, what's less important, to scope the testing itself. Now, testing provides evidence, but testers also must provide an interpretation sometimes to help stakeholders understand what might be quite technical information. But ultimately, the stakeholder has to make their own decision with the support of the test team, and the information we provide. So what kind of questions do we ask stakeholders? Well, obviously, what should be tested and what should not be tested? What's in scope, what's out of scope? What are the most and what are the least important aspects that we have to test? We need to prioritise because we know we haven't always got enough time to do everything, whatever everything is. We need to understand who is using the evidence we provide and for what purpose. Now, it might be obvious, but it's also worth repeating that we need clarity on who our stakeholders actually are, because some tests tend to be done in kind of isolation and we don't necessarily come into contact with our stakeholders very often. But ultimately, they're going to use the information we provide to make some big decisions, perhaps. When testing is squeezed, that is, we know we cannot complete all the testing we think might be appropriate in the time we've got, we need to consult stakeholders and ask them some of the questions above. That is, what is in scope, what is out of scope? Potentially we have to de-scope some stuff. What is the most important? What is the least important? And obviously the least important might be left out of a test plan or a test execution cycle if necessary, because we need the time. But let me look now, suppose you don't have a stakeholder, suppose you don't identify these people, suppose you don't understand what they want from you. Well, if you like, when you run some tests, no one will pay any attention to what you've done because you don't know who the stakeholders are. The stakeholders aren't involved, engaged at all. You don't necessarily have any mandate or authority for testing, so you can't, if you like, take time out of a project schedule to do this job we call testing because nobody has asked for it, let's say. You certainly won't get any resources and you certainly won't get the time you need to do it properly, whatever that means. And if you report test failures, you can't have any expectation of them ever getting resolved because no one cares. We haven't identified our stakeholders. So this is why we try to be what I would call stakeholder obsessed. We are ultimately working on behalf of some other individual or team to deliver information for that team of stakeholders to make a decision. So this idea of stakeholder obsessed is stakeholders are our customers. They are always right, as customers always are. They give us the direction we need. Sometimes stakeholders' interests don't always can coincide. There might be disputes or debates between different stakeholders, like users, who want different things from the same system and may have different priorities. So we have to juggle these priorities amongst the stakeholders and try and come up with a happy medium that satisfies everyone's needs. And of course, we can't test everything, so we need to help the stakeholders to understand what is feasible in the time we've got and what is reasonable in the time we've got. And finally, since most stakeholders are non-technical, we have technical stakeholders for sure, but we tend to have more non-technical, non-programmer kind of stakeholders in our teams. So we must use language that they understand. We have to use their business language or the language they use to define architectures, or we use technical language when we're talking to programmers if we are looking at their code and certainly interfaces.